son, enjoy the ride. Please, son, enjoy the ride. Yeah!
And now more Operation Freedom with your host, Dr. Dave Janda, on Southeast Michigan's conservative powerhouse, Wham Talk 1600.
Welcome back to Operation Freedom, folks. I'm Dr. Dave Janda, broadcasting from our Freedom Bunker at Wham Talk 1600. We're here every Sunday for you from 2 to 5 Eastern. Also available at the following locations 24/7. Our YouTube channel, also named Operation Freedom. We put two new YouTube presentations up. One every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., another every Friday morning, always a little bit briefer, on around 8 a.m. This past Friday, every other week I do a presentation on your health and wellness with Dr. Peter Glidden. It's part of our healthcare series. We speak about issues that I was never trained on in medical school. It involves nutritional support, nutritional wellness. Dr. Peter Glidden is the top naturopathic physician in the country. This past Friday, we wanted to go to YouTube and listen to this. We spoke about the effects of geoengineering and what you can do to protect yourself from the chemicals used in geoengineering as well as environmental exposures. And it's really important that you hear this because I 100% guarantee to you, you will never get that information in the bought-off lamestream fake media. One of the issues that we have focused on since the inception of this show in October 2010 is your financial freedom, your economic freedom. And what's really happening behind the curtain, that the folks at what I call CNBS and Fox Business News and Reuters and Bloomberg will not speak about, will not address. They want to keep you in the dark. And that's to the deep states, the globalist syndicates' advantage. There are a number of folks that we have brought forward to you over the years that have the courage to take on, if you will, the financial powers that be and provide you information that to help secure your financial and economic freedom. One of those people goes by the name of TraderStef, which is a name de plume. And you'll understand why she goes by a name de plume. She, beginning in 1996, initiated a career spanning 14 years within the New York City investment banking industry. She was based in the belly of the beast. She acquired a diverse skill set in human resourcing, technology and communication, training, education and development, business analysis, and global risk management. She began investing in precious metals actually in 1999 while following market trends post-dot-com bubble and after September 11, 2001. Steph then left the banking industry in 2009 after 5 years in global risk management, in particular at Citigroup. She has developed and hosted a live Precious Hour webinar specializing in gold, silver, and the mining equities, combined with research of industry fundamentals, financial markets, global news events, geopolitics, and monetary policy, otherwise known as fusion analysis. Her articles that she has written are superb. They are analytical. They are, but very reader-friendly. Very applicable. Some of these are articles from other people that you read. You go, well, how can I apply that to help my family, myself, help my economic, financial freedom? Steph spills it out and very articulately and very understandably. And she tackles a lot of significant issues at her WordPress site, TraderStef, S-T-E-F, TraderStef.wordpress.com. Steph, welcome back to Operation Freedom.
Hey, Dr. Janda, how are you? Thanks for having me back.
Well, it's an honor to have you back. You know, Steph, one of the best articles I believe I've ever read in the financial analysis realm was an article that you wrote called Dorothy, Silver Shoes, and the Wizard of Oz. And I believe its name was Dorothy Silver Shoes and the Gold to Silver Ratio Fallacy, and I believe you published it on July 7th. You were on our show on July 14th. Yep. And our sympathies are with you and your family because the following day, your father passed away. But
yeah, he did.
So let's talk about the article, and let's talk about some of the ramifications of that article that have occurred since your dad's passing.
Sure, I'd love to. We're kind of going off the beaten path today, but I think it's important that people hear this. A week before my dad passed, I published an article, as you mentioned, and briefly, The Wizard of Oz, everybody knows the movie from 1939. And actually, it was based on a book from 1900, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by Frank Baum. Mm-hmm. And Dorothy's slippers were made of silver, not red rubies. And the entire book actually served as a political allegory at the time. And it was the culture and what was going on in the 1900s. There was a huge battle about monetary policy in a presidential election, and gold and silver was like everyone was talking about at the grocery store, for example. So it was huge, and that's how it got into the movie. But during in the initial article and the interview with you, I failed to mention that the wizard represented the fraudulent central bankers
behind the curtain.
And the government swamp, at that time in history as well.
Mm-hmm. And don't take this wrong, folks, but it's a testament, right, to central banks, the swamp, the deep state, that when this book was written in 1900, and then the movie in, I think, 1939, and here we are in 2019, right?
Yeah, some things never change, huh?
Yeah, right.
As they say.
Back to the Future.
Yeah. So speaking of Back to the Future, so my dad passed away the next day after we did the interview on your radio show. And, look, I've had a few and fleeting experiences from those who've passed away that were near or dear to me throughout my life. I think a lot of folks out there listening probably have too. But never, ever with the depth and confirmation that my dad blessed me with over the course of his wake and his funeral mass. Because unbeknownst to me at the time, his messages had their origins with the Wizard of Oz article in the interview with you. It was very intense. And I spoke to you about that briefly after I returned back from the trip. Mm-hmm. So I published an article on August 8th called Dorothy Silver Slippers Addendum, My Father's Afterlife Message. And given, the restraint with our time slot, I'm only going to mention two of the messages that came from my dad, and one was included in the addendum, and that was my 6-year-old niece. And she was running around the funeral parlor at the wake wearing silver slippers. Now, there's a whole backstory.
No, it's not like the relatives had read your latest article and said, let's Auntie Steph, let's make Auntie, correct?
Yeah, right. That would be pretty cruel, but actually they weren't even aware of it. Right. It's like typical. Most families, they're not really involved in what I do for a living, just like I'm not involved with what they do for a living. Mm-hmm. So they weren't aware of it. And I want to emphasize that. Nobody, whether it was immediate family or extended family, had no clue until I brought it up to them after the fact. So, look, my dad was in the hospital for over a week, and he was unable to follow my work and talk to me as we usually would. We talk about, business and finance, the whole thing. But one message I want to mention that I was not aware of when I wrote the addendum was that during my 12-hour nonstop late evening drive, on July 15th through 6 a.m. on July 16th to get to my dad's bedside, it turns out that you can't make this stuff up. On Coast to Coast AM, which coincidentally is like my favorite late night talk show. Mm-hmm. I've listened to it since the late 90s with Art Bell and, George Norrie. Well, they had, now keep in mind, I didn't know about this until a couple weeks later. They had Father Nathan Castle on the show that night. Now, also a coincidence, if you believe in them, is that he has helped souls cross over for the last 20 years, and that's what the show was about. Now, it gets better because the radio host was George Norrie, and he chose to discuss one book out of several that Father Nathan has published. And you know what it's called?
Go right ahead.
and Toto, 2, The Wizard of Oz as a spiritual adventure. So, look, in any of the articles, I didn't even talk about Toto.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, Toto represented God in The Wizard of Oz. You know, dog spelled backwards, and that's called Semordnilap. You know, when you have a word that you flip it and it's a completely different word spelled same. So, look, there were 3 takeaways that resonated with me about my father's messages from the afterlife. Was to let my family and my friends know that there is life after death and God's good. Number 1. Number 2, he made it a point that he got to read the article and hear the interview. And that's how he knew that I would recognize the messages. And then lastly, we made the right decision investing in silver gold for the past 2 decades. It was amazing.
It is amazing. Which brings us to the entity behind the curtain.
Oh, yeah.
The Fed, right? And there's been some things going on with the Fed that I know you want to discuss. The Fed on the offensive versus versus President Trump in the 2020 election, and in particular, what former New York Fed President Bill Dudley said in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, well, back in the fall, I wrote an article called Trump the Jacksonian has the authority to fire the Fed chair. He actually does. And that's a long story. You'd have to read the article to find out why. But one way that you can fire a Fed chair is through a personal or legal issues that may arise. But, you know, that can be a hopeful waiting game. The other way would fall into a category of, say, policy decisions versus individual views. So an example is if you can reasonably argue that rate hikes and a strengthening dollar do not represent the interests in agriculture, commerce, financial markets, services, labor, consumers, because that can all be detrimental to the administration's agenda and the economic recovery that they're trying to, you know, make happen or avoid a major recession or a complete collapse, which is likely. So the Fed, as the fall guy, if the economy suddenly takes a severe turn, would appear to be the only viable option for him to be able to fire him. So that's where you get the rhetoric going on between the White House and Trump and his administration might be the precedent to set that up, to remove the Fed chair if a major downturn manifests. But now it appears the Fed's circle of influence and former officials, they may have gone on the offense as a defense for their, you know, existence and their mandate that they're struggling to maintain. And it's noteworthy to remember that the Fed's a private bank. You know, they're unelected, appointed officials. They weren't voted into office, which is why they can be fired. So wielding their monetary policy responsibilities as a political tool, it's not a real winning strategy because that sets them up for potential removal, i.e. Powell.
Correct.
And it defeats their offense. So, and it also baits the biased media pundits to show their true colors. And let's take one example, Larry Summers, who was the former Treasury Secretary, and he's a very left-leaning stalwart. He slammed the Fed on CNBC, telling the Fed and William Dudley to keep out of politics, keep your mouth shut, basically, and saying that they're suffering from the worst case of Trump derangement syndrome in the financial industry.
Take that.
Yeah, from Larry Summers, of all people. So it's getting interesting and a little concerning at the same time.
Well, and you know, they just had this huge, I don't know what you want to call it, annual powwow at Jackson Lake Lodge in Washington and the Tetons, and they had all the central bankers there, plus our own, and there was talk that maybe there was going to be this surprise or emergency rate cut which didn't happen, which got the president all fired up, where he's pointing the finger, as you mentioned, and he has been for months, at the Fed, saying they're the problem, they're the problem, they're the problem. Yep. Which they are the problem. They have been the problem since, well, let's go back to The Wizard of Oz, the movie 1939 and the book 1900, right? I mean, well, they weren't around in 1900. Well, central bankers were, but not the Federal Reserve. That came into being into 1913.
Right, but remember, Jackson got rid of the central bank.
That's right.
There was a first central bank before Jackson, I believe, if I've got the chronology correct.
I believe there was. And remember, the portrait that hangs closest to Trump at his desk in the Oval Office is of
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, of course. And what did he say on his deathbed? One of his accomplishments was, and that's just not a myth, it's the truth, I killed the bank.
Right.
And they tried to kill him.
And they did. That's right.
Right.
So what do you see playing out now with this, I don't know what you want to call it, goat rodeo between the Fed and President Trump? And where do you see this going in the near-term future, Steph?
It's got more to do with what's going on globally because it was happening and building before the trade wars even happened with China. And someone actually had to have the guts to do it, so I don't understand why people are whining. It had to be done, so you just need to swallow the pill. We need to get this done. And how's it going to manifest as far as our economy? Well, the things are just a mess, and I could go down the list. I mean, there's dozens of reasons. The ultimate trigger, it's just the system is just too complex for me to say, oh, well, this is going to happen, which is going to trigger this, and then that's going to happen. No, I honestly can't say, but it's coming, whatever it is. It's manifesting as we speak today on many levels. And you're seeing the fear factor in the price of gold.
So we've seen the fear factor in the price of gold and silver, and then on this past Thursday and Friday, right?
Yeah.
We saw gold and silver get taken to the woodshed, right? I mean, they both got hammered. Now, I must say, Steph, you did before they got hit on Thursday and Friday. You did put out a piece.
Yep.
Saying, hey, be aware for a pullback in gold and silver. All right, Steph? So what did you see that made you come up with that? And what do you see coming up in the future with these? Because as you mentioned, this is a way for people to protect themselves.
Yeah. Well, first of all, since August of 2018 up until the high last week, gold tacked on $396 and some change. That's not chump change.
No, it's not.
That was a great run, and there weren't any really major sudden pullbacks during that whole time.
That's right.
You have to have that. Now, the other thing is...
And in fact, you've mentioned that before, Steph. Tell me if I'm wrong in your analysis, that if you have something moving up too fast, that's not a healthy rise.
No, it's not. You want it to be intermittent.
Okay.
And look, remember we were talking about gold, a year ago I was bringing up the charts, and just before we had the downturn early in the year, I was talking about seasonality.
Right.
It just so happened that this year in particular, and gold in particular, but silver also, but maybe by a lag by a week or so, is spot on with the seasonality charts when you're looking at the 20-year seasonality. And when you look at it, there's typically a drawback in September, sometime in the first 2 weeks of September. It's right there on the seasonality charts. You can't miss it. And when I published the article with just the charts of what was going on, there were two warning shots, particularly on the gold chart, which was a shooting star candlestick and a hanging man candlestick. Now, I don't want to get into a lot of technical things if, the audience is not seeing what I'm talking about, so you won't connect. The point being was that it was a warning shot that, hey, it was coming and you may need to be prepared for this. Now, with silver, there wasn't any real indication that it was happening until we had something I call a RIPO move. And that's at least $1 a day. In gold, it would be $100 a day, a move, which we almost had in gold. I think we put $90-some on one of the day in an up move, that's pretty hefty. But when silver had a $1 run at one day, and it took out the up channel of the price move since June, it was almost like a blow off top to some degree. It's just not a good thing to have. You went nice, slow, and steady. And I knew it was coming, and it happened Thursday and Friday. Now, you can attach any reasons you want to it, but the fact is that this is healthy, it's okay, and neither of the uptrends in either one has been violated. They're absolutely fine. The chart looks great. However, if this pullback gets worse and say the 50-day exponential moving average is taken out to the downside with conviction. There could be a little bit more downside, but I wouldn't be concerned because all the fundamental factors are going to feed this rally back to where it needs to go. And the target on silver is 21.49. We've got to take that out. I've talked about that on numerous occasions, what it represents. And with gold, we need to get up into that 1586 level, 1580s level, and take that out with conviction so that we can make a run up to the old high of 1920.
And when silver breaches that 2140, because you've been very consistent about this 2149 mark, okay, Steph? I mean, for eons. You've been, boom, this is the number, and once it's taken out, when that number's taken out, you mentioned where you think gold goes after it breaks the 1580 level. It goes to new highs, 1900.
Yeah.
What number are you looking at with silver when that 2149's taken out?
I don't have one, but let me remind everyone that the number in gold was 1380. Mm-hmm. And everyone was talking somewhere between 1350 and 1400. You can go through all the pundits. Everyone had a different number, but 1380 was the Fibonacci, and that's almost right in the middle in that, spread. So it's the same thing with silver. When gold took out to 1380, I immediately put out an article. I said, hey, look, don't freak out if there's a pullback, to now test that level as being a support rather than a resistance, because it was resistance for 6 years. Mm-hmm. And the longer it's resistance, the harder it is to get through. So the move was more violent going through it, but then it had to be tested to make sure it was going to be support, and that happened. Now with silver, 2149 would be the same thing. It'll be taken out violently, but then it's going to fall back and it's going to have to test it as a support level. That would be a good time to be adding positions, in my personal opinion.
Now, Steph, a number of listeners to this show say that they have contacted their broker and spoken to their broker about the purchase of physical precious metals, and it being as a, if you will, an insurance type of product for their portfolios, for their economic and financial freedom. And they've been told by their broker that, well, that's not a safe thing to do or a good thing to do, and that you should actually be focused more on any pullback in the stock market to be buying more Apple, Google, Netflix, Facebook stock.
Well, they're usually talking their books, and number two, you're a doctor, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people see doctors as God, and they assume that every doctor knows everything that's going on and everything all the time when it comes to medical science. But what was the one thing that you were never taught in medical school?
There were many things, but one of which was the nutritional aspect, the nutritional wellness side of medicine.
Well, I kind of see gold and silver because they're monetary metals that have a history of several thousand years. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like the nutrition for money.
You know what?
Not everyone really understands it.
Actually, that's incredibly insightful, Steph. That's actually very true.
Yeah.
Because you see it day in and day out. I monitor, CNBS and Fox Business News just to see what's being spewed to the public as far as misinformation and disinformation, because it needs to be addressed. And I don't particularly enjoy watching those broadcasts. But you're right. It is what nutritional medicine, nutritional support is to medicine, to medical education. Gold and silver is to the financial networks and the financial information networks. Now, Steph, how can folks follow you? They need to follow you on a daily basis.
My website's at TraderStef.wordpress.com, and follow me on Twitter under the moniker TraderStef with ended in F, so that you can get real-time updates.
Steph, I'd like to thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You are an incredible beacon of information for anyone trying to enhance their economic and financial freedom. Folks, you're listening to Operation Freedom. Dr. Dave Janda broadcasting from our Freedom Bunker here at Wham Talk 1600.